Olá! O conteúdo que vocês assistirão será apresentado pelo professor Dr. Filip de Fruyt, da Universidade de Ghent, na Bélgica, além de membro do Comitê Científico do EduLab 21. De Fruyt falará sobre os efeitos do desenvolvimento das competências socioemocionais de curto e longo prazo e discutirá as consequências do desenvolvimento de competências em diferentes esferas. O professor também apresentará os circunplexos de aprendizagem e interpessoal e como eles se relacionam aos diferentes estilos de aprendizagem na escola. Espero que você aproveite essa apresentação. Até a próxima!
I think that social and emotional development and programs focusing on social emotional development really need to be oriented towards direct outcomes, but also long-term outcomes. So there's particular evidence that if you focus on social and emotional skills training, that it has immediate effects, for example, in the classroom. So there are beneficial effects already early on. But of course, with these programs, you are also facing on long-term outcomes, which is a very important piece. If you are thinking about 21st century skills, this is exactly future-oriented. So one of the key characteristics of social-emotional skills is that these are skills that help you to adapt to new situations. So it's by definition future-oriented, and some of these outcomes are pretty close in time, and some of these outcomes are in the longer run. Outcomes are multiple, of course, and an important piece is also that outcomes are usually determined by a broad range of factors, not only about social emotional skills. Let us be clear on this. But I think that roughly speaking, you can group the outcomes of the social emotional skills in 5 clusters. If I'm talking about them, I'm usually grouping them in a first cluster, which is more proximate in time, which I would call educational outcomes. And these educational outcomes, they can be achievement, the traditional indicators we are looking at here in Brazil, math and how people achieve on Portuguese, but also how the students get along with each other. An important problem in schools could be bullying. So if you invest in social-emotional skill development, that will certainly help in dealing with the consequences of bullying at school. So I consider that all as a kind of educational outcomes, which are pretty close in time, in between when you invest in them through specific programs and what you get in terms of results. Yeah? So in addition to these educational outcomes, of course, in the longer run, we are also thinking about increased employability. 21st century skill thinking actually wants to prepare people also for the labor market. That's an important piece of what people are doing. It's not only about the labor market, let be clear on this as well. It's also about personal well-being and being a contributor to society. I'll come back to that in a third cluster. But employability is really a key issue because we are facing longer careers. So what people learn at school will, and the skills they learn at school will have direct consequences in how they go to the labor market, how they will navigate on the labor market, how they will select their first jobs, how they will perform in the selection exercises for getting access to the labor market, and how they will progress their careers. So there are a bunch of challenges there at the labor market. For example, one of the big changes is that we will shift from individual to more team-based type of work. So that will require that we will practice our collaboration skills, that we can communicate better with each other. Skills like empathy and so on, which are all covered in our model, will have an impact immediately in education, how the students will get along with each other, but when they are coming on the labor market, then they will have a direct advantage of all this when they have to work in teams, you see. So in addition to the first cluster, education, the second cluster, labor market issues and employability, also usually talk about a third cluster, which is, to my opinion, very important, which is the more citizenship, what I would call more citizenship behavior, that is making a contribution to society. We are facing very different issues in societies everywhere around the world. Let's take a common theme, which is the environment. We need to care about our environment. We need to adapt our behavior in terms of that. Well, if this is already practiced at school, then this will have its effects later on too, hopefully. Yeah? But it's not only about the environment, it's also about contributing to society. It's about political engagement. It's about volunteering for certain things that you do in society. So it's quite a broad cluster, I would say, of outcomes that are affected by a broad range of the skills that we are focusing on in the model. Yeah? A fourth piece is then that we really focus not only on the contribution to society, but also how people develop their interpersonal relationships with each other. That's a very important piece. We all want that people are connected with each other. It's important at the societal level, but it's also really important for people that they connect in their interpersonal network, that they build up a family, that they connect with friends, that they help each other out. That's the social function of your social network. And some of the skills in our model, the more engagement skills and the amity skills, really speak to that. So that's also a long-term outcome. So we want to prepare actually our children to become good parents themselves. So we want them that they have good parenting skills if they become fathers and mothers, that they take care of their children and that they give them a future and help them navigate in that future and in that complex world and become good citizens. Yeah? And then in addition to the interpersonal field, there's also what we would call the intrapersonal field and so becoming a happy person. That it's really an important thing. Many of the skills we focus on have a kind of adaptive value. So they are functional. They help you to cope and to adapt with challenges of life. And sometimes we are facing serious challenges. In many cases it goes well, but there's also some things that go wrong in life, and we need to train and to help and prepare our students and our children for that. So skills like emotion regulation, different coping strategies are really important and help to that. And that helps them to prevent mental health problems, and at the same time we really want them to take care of their personal life and their try to engage them in a healthy life as well. So issues like encouraging them to do physical exercises, encouraging them to look a little bit at what they eat. Not that I'm saying that there should be an extreme focus on that, but at least these are important issues that school can help and can actually create a basis and develop skills that have these consequences later on. Yeah? So I'm not saying that these are the 5 containers, but it helps a little bit in thinking about these potential outcomes. Well, a very short take on that is if you overview the literature on 21st century skills, you will see that it's rather chaotic. you have all these different models around, and what we try to focus on with EduLab is to actually go to the common core across all these different models. That took us some time to get there, but the big advantage if you really go to the common core, that is that you can connect with almost everything, and that helps you in having actually a good comprehensive view on the topic. So we are proposing a model that consists of 5 broad skill sets, I would say, that are really helpful in adapting to challenges and to new situations. They all have a kind of functional capacity. So our first 2 domains, the engagement domain and the amity domain, they really speak to how you deal with other people. So engagement is about really the frequency of social interaction. So you have people who are a bit more at the introverted side, and then you have really sociable people, people who are assertive, and these are dimensional constructs, so you have a lot of variability in between there. So, but that is mainly about frequency of social interaction. And then you have a second domain that comes in, which really has to do with what we call amity, and which is really about the quality of social interaction, whether you approach interpersonal situations from a more egocentric, cold perspective versus more an empathic, caring type of approach. And these 2, they actually combine in what we call a kind of interpersonal circle. All different sorts of interpersonal behavior you can describe according to these 2 domains. So this is already a very important part of the skill set. As a third domain, we have the emotion regulation domain. As I explained before, we are intrinsically developed actually also to deal with when it goes wrong. To deal with negative emotions, this is a very important piece, how you cope with problems, how you deal with that, and this is represented in the model too. And then we really have 2 other dimensions which have also a strong adaptive value and which really focus on how you approach new situations. That's the openness dimension, which is really important, combined with the self-management dimension, which is really about, it has 2 important pieces. It's about goal setting. You can be ambitious in terms of your goal setting, and the second piece in this domain is really about starting it, about the self-discipline to do it. So if you have high achieving goals and if you have a lot of self-discipline, then you are equipped to achieve well. So these 5 dimensions actually give us a very comprehensive model, and what we did in the SENA model is we are using these 5 as a sort of broad anchors, and we developed more specific facets or more specific skills under these broader domains. The model we made, of course, is a kind of toolkit, I would call it, of very different skills, and that's a little bit of a technical way of approaching the problem, but in reality it's always a lot more complex what you do. The kind of outcomes I was talking about, these outcomes are really determined by not only multiple of these skills, but also by, like I already said, by other factors. And so in some cases you can really make a kind of one-to-one relation that a particular skill is helpful to reach a particular outcome. But usually these outcomes will require that you use multiple of these skills combined. And often, depending on the context, the combination of skills you will need could be very different. So one of the examples we are sometimes giving is the problem of bullying. If you want to prevent bullying, well, you need to be assertive enough. If you are, for example, observing that someone is bullied in the school, then you need to speak up. So that's the assertiveness skill, the assertiveness piece that comes there. At the same time, you need to feel empathy with the victim. That will bring you to speak up. So these are already two different skills. One is from the engagement field, assertiveness is from the engagement field, and having empathy is from the field of amity. So you really need already these two pieces, and then an additional piece comes in. You need to look in terms of a creative way how you will deal with that. It's a complex situation. How you will deal with that requires a certain creativity. So here you see already in this very small example that it's a mixture of the skills that are enclosed in our model that you actually need in a single individual that has to use these skills in a flexible way. So you see the complexity of all this to try to have an impact of this kind of outcome. So one of the interesting features of the model is that we actually can use these domains, these 5 domains, and combine them to look at phenomena we are interested in. And we use pairwise combinations of these broader domains to look at specific fields that we are interested in. So for example, if we combine the self-management, the vertical axis, as you can see on the slide, if we combine the self-management dimension with the openness dimension, this circumplex model, you see that you have the vertical and the horizontal axis. The combination of that is actually a circumplex model. This tells us about how people actually learn. So this speaks immediately to what is happening in the classroom, where we have people and students with very different positions on either the on the vertical axis or on the horizontal axis. And for example, if you look at the first quadrant, so now then we are looking at the scheme at the upper right quadrant. There you have people who are planful in their approach, who are self-steering, that's the self-management part, combined with an openness to new ideas. So the good thing is that they are very receptive and very creative in their approach, but they also do something with it. They are steerful enough, they have the self-discipline to do something with these ideas. I love this kind of students. As you know, I'm an academic and a professor myself, and it's always big fun to work with these students because you can discuss a lot of ideas with them. They are receptive, they are open to capture them, and if they come 2 or 3 weeks later to you, then they have done something with it. They elaborated on these ideas because they have this self-management piece as well. Yeah? This is very different, and if we go down to the lower part of the circumplex model at the right side, where you have the students who are open to and are receptive to new ideas and creative, but they have a problem sometimes with self-management. They score low on this type of skill as they are not that organized and not that planful, and it can happen that these students then after 2 weeks come back to you and nothing really happened. You start an explorative discussion again. So the way to deal with these people is to help them increase their self-management levels, and you can do that by giving them some more guidance and say, hey, think about it, and you report me, for example, within a couple of days. You send me an email where you actually are explaining and summarizing what we have been discussing about. Yeah? So if you move now to the upper quadrant at the left side, there you have a different type of student, and these students they are a bit scared of open-ended problems, and you really need to prepare the problem quite well with them and structure your approach. And if you've done that, then they will do it because they have the self-steering capacities to do something with it. And then if you go to the lower quadrant of the circumplex model, the students who are low in openness and low in self-management, there you really need to really think about your approach. You really need to have a structured approach with them and do a good follow-up. You need to support the process in terms of the planning and in the organization. And I think that teachers have students distributed across the different segments of this circumplex in their classroom. And I really think that it's a great help if you actually have a good view right from the beginning on where your students are, where their position is in this circumplex approach, so you can really fine-tune with them and individualize your approach. Of course, you need to follow the curriculum, and you need to, what you do in the classroom is a kind of approach that works for or should work for the entire classroom, but at the same time, you need to think that the approach should be individualized and that people will approach what you are giving them from different angles and different ways. And you can be supportive on that if you know this model. So if you are interested in learning about how people get along with each other in the classroom or even outside the classroom, then you can really look at how you can position them in terms of our model using two of the dimensions. The first dimension is what we call engagement with others. This is the vertical axis in the model you see, and this really is about frequency of social interaction. Whereas the second dimension we bring in here, Amity, this is really about the quality of the social interaction. So if you look into the model, the vertical axis, these are the people who are at ease, who are sociable, who easily approach new people, strangers, and so on and so forth. Whereas the people at the low side of the engagement with others dimension, they really, they prefer more to be alone. They have a little difficulty in interacting with others. They are less sociable, and you have all the variability in between. Whereas if you're looking at the Amity dimension, that really speaks to whether the positive side of it is whether you have a warm approach, whether you are caring about others, whether you are empathic, versus the low side of it is more the people who are egocentric, who approach interpersonal situations more from their own perspective, their egocentric perspective. Yeah? So you can actually plot all your students into this circumplex kind of model, and it gives you a nice view on how your students will interact in a classroom setting or outside of the classroom, when there's a break or when you do other activities outside classroom activities. That helps you a lot. So if we go into the specifics of the model, and I will use a similar description, I will do the same ordering like I did with the learning circumplex. So if we start clockwise, in the right angle, the top angle, there you have people who are at ease and who really are sociable, and they combine it with an empathic and a warm approach. So what they are very easy to get along with, and they really care about others as well. So this is actually a very interesting combination of skills. Whereas the people who are in the bottom part at the right side, they have this kind of caring approach, but they do it more from an introverted perspective. So they are not the people who will speak up, but they will sympathize with the others, and they will be empathic with others, but they are not the most assertive ones. So when it comes up to bullying, and if they observe bullying, they will sympathize with the victim, but they might lack the skills to speak up and to say, stop with this. Because this is the assertiveness piece, and that is in the upper part of the model. Yes. And then if we go to the left part, the part below, excuse me, if we take the top part, the more engaged versus the low Amity scorers. Well, these are, this kind of people are at ease with speaking up, but they might lose connection with others. Sometimes they are overdoing and they lose a kind of buy-in to others. They are approaching situations more from an egocentric perspective and from a dominant perspective. And often they are perceived a little bit by others as sometimes as a bit arrogant, because they speak up and they do not take too much others into account. And the lower P's are really the persons who are low on assertiveness, low on engagement with others, and who perceive social interactions more from an egocentric point of view. So they are less empathic and they are really on themselves. So you will observe them in the classroom. So they often require the special attention of a teacher, and you really need to say to them, hey, when it comes to presentation tasks, for example, they will probably not really like it, because if you need to present something in the classroom, you need to face the audience, and they do not connect because they have this kind of egocentric approach of acting as well. Well, I think if we try to predict something, of course, we hope that our skills are predictive for the kind of outcomes I was just talking about. But as I already said, there will be multiple factors. And the key issue is that children and students do not develop in a kind of vacuum, I would say. So there are contexts around, and I think for students there are three really important contexts. The first context is the family context. That's really an important context in which the children develop. On top of that, you also have the peer group, which is really important. For example, for adolescents, I think the peer group is a very, very important network that has very specific influences, and students and young people learn a lot from their peers that they do not learn in their families. And then on top of that, you have a third network that is really important, and that is the classroom. So the classroom is actually, or what is happening at school, this is a more structured environment. There are rules to follow, there are jobs to do, tasks to do, you need to collaborate with people. That's all much, much more structured. So this is a little bit the equivalent you have for adults. You would talk about the work context. What you do in your job, the equivalent of these structured environments is actually the school context. And in these contexts, the student is developing and is actually developing his skills. And this is really an important point to have in mind if you want to study these skills. You really need to have these three pieces of information and really think about these three contexts. So when we are talking about these contexts, what is really important also from a policy point of view, that is that policymakers will be interested whether what is happening in one context can actually compensate or help to improve skills for what is probably or maybe going wrong in another context. Yeah? So for example, children who have a very tough home situation, so that's the family environment. From a policy perspective, you are really interested to see if you can compensate or strengthen them at the school level with the kind of program you develop at the school level. If you can help people and if you can have a kind of compensatory effect on what is happening in the family environment. So now we have this kind of social emotional skill model, and we know that it connects to outcomes in the long term and in the short term. I think the big challenge is for education is to bring this social emotional skill taxonomy, to bring that into a curriculum. That will require a lot of discussion, and we need to do that bottom up. We will need to hear different parties. That means not only the policymakers, but we need to hear teachers. We will need to hear the students as well. I think they have an important voice in all this. And I really think that this is a kind of exercise that we have to do together. But there's also good news. There's a lot of evidence already. We know already a lot to support this process. So it's not a matter that you need to create all this from scratch. We know about how the social and emotional skills already develop. We have a taxonomy. With EduLab, we have been working on an assessment tool. We already identified a series of interventions that do not speak for the full model, but that focus on specific skills in the model. So I really think that there's already a lot of evidence and a lot of support for this. And we really need to bring that together. I think ultimately we will need our own social and emotional skills to make this entire enterprise a success.